Good evening, everyone. Maybe this was put into my head by the sad news this morning that Darth Vader has died. Or rather, that James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader, has died. But when it comes to the big political story today, I think the theme is the Empire Strikes Back. If not the Empire, well, at least the Treasury. Because after a tense and fascinating Commons debate about the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, the government won easily. No surprise there, though more than 50 Labour MPs seem to have abstained. No concessions, no softening of the policy. And there is a sense in the Labour leadership of no alternative either. Here's the Prime Minister speaking this morning to the Trade Union Congress in Brighton.
This is not and never will be a government that will sit around the table with you and tell you that black is white. But I do have to make clear, from a place of respect, that this government will not risk its mandate for economic stability under any circumstances. And with tough decisions on the horizon, pay will inevitably be shaped by that. I owe you that candour.
And that is quite a candid message to take directly to the TUC. But it's not over in this sense. Many senior Labour people, as many backbenchers, just feel the message is all wrong. An endless, bleak, dreary and hopeless trudge, rather than the hope for a rebuilt, stronger country voters expected Labour to offer. During the Commons debate, I'd say the mood on the Labour benches was less rebellious or furious than sad, confused and a little beaten down. The Tories, by contrast, enjoying the liberation of opposition, were almost cheerful. Leading for them, the would-be leadership contender Mel Stride enthusiastically accused ministers of lying to the country about their treatment of pensioners, and then he rather effectively dropped his voice.
Now rather more gently, rather more quietly, make an impassioned plea to those sitting opposite. Look to your conscience. These measures... You know in your heart... No, I will not give way. You know in your heart that these measures are wrong. You know in your heart that the party opposite has broken their promises and that these measures are going to lead to untold hardship for millions of elderly and vulnerable people right up and down this country.
Now, just a couple of hours after that, Tory MPs were voting in the last round of their leadership contest before their Birmingham conference. Mr Stride had been widely expected to fail to make the final four, who'll be allowed a beauty contest parade there. He spoke very well in the Chamber, but there was no Mel momentum. Politics is a brutal trade, and he was indeed out. Well, anyway, for the House of Commons, the pensions deed is now done. But the Parliamentary Labour Party is scarred, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, who wasn't in the Chamber, may find it even harder than she thought to persuade them to vote for further big spending cuts in the budget at the end of October. I'm told this particular cut for pensioners, which Treasury officials had tried and failed to persuade her predecessor Jeremy Hunt to do, was pushed on her very early on, and perhaps she didn't realise quite what she was getting into. Keir Starmer has been warned privately he must now offer more hope and a clearer sense of direction to explain what the short-term pain is meant to achieve. Well, as ever, our political correspondent, Aggie Chambre, has been rushing around Parliament all day speaking to the key players. Aggie, very good to have you on the show. Let's talk, first of all, about the semi-rebellion. All those people abstaining, quite a large number, but very, very few people, indeed only one person, actually voting against his government.
Indeed, as you say, it's over 50 MPs, Labour MPs, not voting with the government, abstaining. Now, of course, there could be any number of those, and there is suggestion that quite a number of those were slipped by the whips, meaning that basically they had a legitimate excuse.
A nudge and a wink.
Be there.
Don't bother turning up, it's fine.
Well, quite. Yeah. But of course, there is only one Labour MP who didn't vote with the government, who voted against the government, I should say. And I think that is interesting in itself, because we spoke about this last week. We basically said, there are Labour MPs who are very, very nervous about voting against the government because of that vote before the summer in July, where basically they were just concerned that if they were to, they would lose the whip. But interestingly, John Trickett today did vote against the government, and he hasn't yet lost the whip. Now, a couple of people have said to me, well, look, it wasn't a King's speech. But there was definitely the implication that anyone that voted against the government might lose the whip. And it will be interesting to see, you mentioned the budget there, how does that play out in future possible rebellions?
I think that is really the biggest question of all. How sort of scarred is the Labour Party in Parliament by this? I mean, I talked to lots and lots of MPs, and they're really upset about it. They really, really did not want to vote for this. They didn't think that's why they came into politics. And there's a lot of grumbling about the lack of explanation, the lack of a kind of, a vision on the hill that they're all marching towards. As I said, it's been so grim, so bleak.
I think it has been really difficult for some of them. I mean, Rachel Reeves went into PLP yesterday, widely sort of said that was a success. It went down well. But I spoke to one MP who on the way in said, I think I'm going to abstain. They did indeed abstain. Walked in, they said, I'm going to listen. And they went in and they came out and they said, well, I've heard all that. I heard that on TV. I've heard that, they have to make tough decisions. So I think the idea that there hasn't been a great deal of explanation has been rather difficult for some MPs, especially because it was announced before the summer. They went back to their constituencies and got a real earful from a number of constituencies about how difficult this was going to be. And without that kind of explanation, instead it being, well, look, more difficult decisions are to come. It's not our fault. That is going to be difficult for people going forward. And there has been this vote. Labour has won, of course, that vote with big numbers. But that doesn't mean the problem's necessarily gone away.
Let's look a little bit at how the decision came about, Aggie, because I mentioned at the beginning of the show there that Jeremy Hunt, for instance, had been Treasury officials had suggested to Jeremy Hunt when he was Chancellor, this is a great wheeze, why don't we get rid of the winter fuel allowance? And he thought, not at my Nelly, I'm not going to do that. But he wasn't the only one, was he? He
wasn't the only one, no. I have spoken to people today who worked for Rishi Sunak when he was the Chancellor. I've spoken to people today who worked for Kwasi Kwarteng when he was the Chancellor. And they say this was brought up to them, not just once, but more than once. And I said, well, why didn't you do it? And I mean, one of them slightly flippantly said to me, because we like pensioners and old people. But Ed Balls as well, of course, former Shadow Chancellor, married to Yvette Cooper, also talked about this and on his podcast and suggested that Rachel Reeves might be quite annoyed at the Treasury for pushing her into an immediate decision on this. Now, the Treasury say they didn't have access to previous advice and pointed out that Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy. But yeah, interesting to see what happens next.
It doesn't quite wash, does it? All right, Aggie, thank you for the moment very much indeed. Last night I mentioned to you that before the election, Darren Jones, now Chief Secretary to the Treasury, had publicly attacked the Tories for the possibility of exactly the winter fuel cut he is now helping to implement, and it's really going to hurt people. He joins me now. Darren Jones, very good to have you on the show. Why was a measure which you were outraged about the Tories even thinking of suddenly acceptable that now that Labour's in power?
Because for two reasons. One, I didn't know then what I know now, which is that the Conservatives left £20 billion of unfunded spending commitments this year that we need to tidy up, having come into government. And two, because we've committed to the triple lock in the Labour Party manifesto, which means that pensioners will be better off at a time when they've got lower energy bills, £900 last year and up to £470 additional money next year. But Andrew, I'd just say that we came into this election saying that the Labour Party should be trusted on the economy. We were elected on that mandate to get a grip of the public finances and the economy, and that is exactly what we're doing. Did we want to make these decisions? No. But the fact is we've got that £22 billion gap in spending this year alone left to us by Conservative ministers, and we've got to close it and we've got to get a grip of it so that we can fix the foundations and then start to rebuild Britain.
But there is an honesty issue here, is there not, as Mel Stride was arguing in the Commons? I mean, I'm not quite a pensioner, but an awful lot of pensioners listened to you during the general election campaign, and you made it clear you were not going to cut the winter fuel allowance. And now you have. You can see why people simply feel betrayed.
I'm not going to take any lessons about honesty from the Conservatives who hid the fact that
what about from me?
Overdraft. No, let's just be clear. The Conservatives blew the country's overdraft, £9 billion, which is supposed to be for the year. They'd maxed it out in the first 3 months of the financial year and then called an election and ran away. They've left £22 billion of unfunded spending. This is about our National Health Service, our schools, our police. It's about the energy system. We can't hide that fact, as the Conservatives did. We are being honest with the public. That's the mandate we were elected on, and that's the job we're doing.
But Darren, this is a political choice. You as a government have chosen, for instance, to give relatively well-paid train drivers quite a big increase above inflation and to take money away from pensioners. How can you justify inequity and reason and fairness that choice?
Well, because most of our train services are actually paid for by the taxpayers because it's a failed privatised system, and every day of strikes on the train system.
But you've given them more money, not the pensioners. That's the point. My point is that you have given relatively well-paid train drivers a good increase, and you have taken money away from relatively poor pensioners. I'm just asking you how inequity and fairness and morality that stacks up.
We have to be clear, taxpayers were paying for every day of strikes on the trains. It cost more than the settlement in pay that we were able to offer. This is part of getting a grip on the public finances. And we have to be clear, the winter fuel payment was going to lots of wealthy pensioners who did not need the money. This was well known about this universal payment. And as a group of people, pensioners are the only group in British society who are protected with the triple lock on pensions against inflation. That's why they've got a great deal through the triple lock pension increases last year and next year, and why at a time when energy bills are reducing, they will be net better off as a consequence of what this government is delivering.
Was this a wheeze imposed on you by Treasury officials and you were too naive not to say no?
No, it was a decision we had to take in the context of £22 billion of unfunded spending commitments this year, where we had to find the money so that we could continue to deliver national health services, social care services, GP surgeries, and our schools. The people that we should be angry with are the Conservatives, who have been rightly booted out of office because they lost control of the economy and of public finances. And that is why this Labour government was elected on the basis of getting a grip of the public services and our public finances, even when that means taking difficult decisions, which I recognise this is. We are delivering on our mandate.
So you've taken a difficult decision and you've all had a pretty bumpy day as a result. Looking ahead to the budget, is there going to be much worse to come?
Well, look, the Chancellor's been clear already that we're going to have to go further on spending, on welfare and tax in order to get a grip of the public finances this year. But the reason we're doing that, the reason we've got to reset the public budgets, is so that we can start to invest in fixing the foundations, which means fixing the investment problems in our public services, and then start to deliver on our manifesto commitments to grow the economy. That's what we put in our manifesto. That's what we were elected to do, and that's what we're delivering.
You said spending, welfare and tax. I was very interested in what the Prime Minister Keir Starmer said to the TUC today when he went and said, in almost blunt terms, there's not going to be pay increases. Is this because you are worried that after the first round of public sector settlements, when you came in as government, there's going to be a steady stream of demands for more and more money from the trade unions, and this is the moment to say, no, you're not getting anything?
Well, look, the unresolved disputes on public sector pay that was left by the Conservatives when they ran away, having broken the economy, was on the basis of the mandate they had set for the independent pay review bodies, which didn't include any assessment of affordability. In short, how much money there was to pay for public sector wage increases. We're going to do the job properly in government, and that means giving those affordability assessments to the independent pay review bodies so that the pay we're able to offer is, yes, in line with the general economy, but also affordable to the taxpayer.
A lot of Labour MPs I've been talking to say the problem they've got is that the prognosis, the view forward is so unutterably bleak. It's all bad news. It's all grim. It's a kind of economic wasteland. And your failure so far has been to show people some hope. Are you going to show people some hope? Are we going to get a change of tone from this government?
You will see through the Labour Party conference into the budget and into the new year how we're going to be delivering on our manifesto, which was a manifesto of change, but that started by getting a grip of the public finances and bringing stability back to our politics.
I can hear the division bell going. Darren, just before you go, is John Trickett going to lose the whip for voting against the government?
That's the matter for the Chief Whip, Andrew, and I'm sure we'll both find out in due course.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Darren Jones. Now then, I'm still with Aggie Chambre. And Aggie, that was really interesting. A few things that he said there struck me. I mean, clearly there is going to be tough news in the budget, not just on public sector pay, which he was talking about there, but also on taxes.
It definitely sounded like that. And I mean, more kind of defence of the fact that more defence there that they were paying that they'd increased money for train drivers. I thought it was interesting as well. I mean, we wouldn't have expected him to comment on John Trickett, but absolutely didn't deny that he would lose the whip there as well, and also promising there'll be kind of more vision and more hope at conference. So I guess we'll find out more there.
We certainly will. Aggie, thank you very much indeed. And of course, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well. Have the government done the right thing making this difficult decision to cut winter fuel payments? Text me on 84850 or email marr@lbc.co.uk. Coming up, as the US straps in for the much-anticipated Harris versus Trump debate, the American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, met with David Lammy to emphasise just how special our special relationship is in these troubled international times.